Here we are with part two of World War II, and I hope everybody's having a good spring break because I know I am, and that's when I'm recording this. So what we're going to get through today is we're going to get through the initial part of the war effort and then also go into some issues here at home, especially pertaining to women and minorities. And then we're going to cut things off, and we'll do a third and possibly a fourth part that covers the actual fighting of World War II. When we get to that part, it's going to be kind of disjointed. We're not going to spend all of our time in one theater and then move all of our time to the other theater, just because it's hard to it's hard not to go back and forth a little bit if you're trying to tell World War II as a narrative story. So it is maybe going to be a little bit more disjointed than what you might be used to, but we'll get to that in parts 3 and 4. So in order to fight a war, we talked about this before, wars are expensive, so you need money. You also need an army, and that's especially important for us because with the exception of World War I, we've never really needed a large standing army. We've never had any foreign powers that are immediate neighbors to us. And so our army historically has never really been that large, especially when you compare it to the European powers. We've always depended more on our Navy, more on the Marine Corps than anything else. So we have to build our army. Now, in terms of raising money, one of the best ways to do that is by issuing bonds. We've talked about bonds before. Also raising taxes, but also rationing goods. Again, we talked about deficit spending before. Deficit spending is when you spend money even though you owe money. And that is something that we started back in World War I, even prior to World War I, and especially deficit spending really got ramped up during the New Deal and the Great Depression. We're going to continue to ramp that up as we continue down the path towards war. Rationing, a lot of the images that you'll see on these PowerPoint slides are propaganda, and a lot of them are going to encourage rationing, either by law or by self-rationing. So the one in the top left corner is one of my favorites. It says, when you ride alone, you ride with Hitler. And what they're trying to promote is car sharing or carpooling. And of course what that does is that saves on gasoline. Gasoline rations were a big part of the war effort. You're also going to see a lot of stores who are going to adhere to price fixing. There's going to be top maximum prices. You're also going to see a big push to make sure that you only sell goods that are purchased with ration stamps. That way we are ensuring as a country that we're conserving everything that we can for the war effort. And you'll also see, as with the middle poster there, the Tokyo Kid, that there's going to be a lot of racial stereotypes, especially of Germans and of the Japanese as well. The selective service, we get an additional act to that, the Selective Service, or the Selective Training and Service Act. This is still legal. It's still on the books. Basically, if you're 18, you must register for the draft. Doesn't mean that a draft will actually be instituted, because the likelihood at this point in history is that it would not ever be issued, but it always could be. There is always that threat. But here in 1943-ish is where we see that. FDR actually, prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the United States entry into World War II, gives what he calls his 4 freedoms speech. And you see the 4 freedoms there to the right. I'm sorry, but I think my face is covering up the last one. 4 freedoms are the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. So the freedom of speech, worship, from want, and from fear. And especially the first two, they are specifically mentioned in some of our foremost documents, like the Constitution. The last two are sort of spin-offs. Those are sort of new freedoms that are put out there by FDR, and it sort of helps to define he's trying to help define who we are as a country, and he's trying to differentiate us from the Axis powers. He's trying to differentiate us from Nazi Germany, from fascist Italy, from the Japanese Empire. Those freedoms are things that separate us, not just from those empires, but also really other empires and other democracies around the world. And these become central to a lot of the things that Roosevelt is going to try to push publicly. And so these four freedoms are very, very important. Now, moving on, you'll see these a lot of times emphasized, freedom from want. We have more than enough, so try to do with less, okay, so that soldiers have enough. You see there, that's an actual rationing card, a gasoline ration card. You see very, very specific, not just the name of the owner, but the street address. They even get so specific as to give vehicle registration number, to make sure that individuals don't use more gasoline than what they absolutely need. And if you talk to several people here locally in Attica, there's a good chance you're going to find gasoline rationing cards, grocery rationing cards, also draft cards, and that's something that we'll get into as we get into Korea and Vietnam. But there's a lot of these records that are still around even today. So, as we get into sort of ramping up for the war effort, the female workforce specifically raises by about 6 million in the 4 years. In the 4 years that the United States is either ramping up their involvement for or are actually involved in the war, and this is pretty obvious. We're building our army to send overseas to fight. We need people to fill the jobs that are left behind by those men that are going off and fighting. And one of the natural groups that we're going to look to are women. So they're going to fill a number of different jobs, from factories to police force, really anything involved in war production. You see kind of the most famous of all World War II propaganda is Rosie the Riveter down there in the bottom right. We can do it. Factories would be filled with women. This is also going to, again, lead to an increase of independence for women. Most of them will return to domestic life after the war, but a pretty sizable number of them still continue to work. They still continued in their professions that they had started while the war was still going on. And you even have some women, as in the picture there on the top right, and the top left and the bottom left, some women even participate in the military itself. Now, albeit in non-combat positions, but some even earn full rank. Mostly they're going to be involved in traditional positions such as nursing, but you will have some who will work on planes, who will even fly, transport runs, things like that. So you do have quite a bit of participation by women, again, in the run-up to and in the actual fighting of the war itself. Now, Japanese Americans, who we touched on in part 1 of this video, they're not the only minorities who face difficulty during World War II. African Americans in pretty large numbers, are going to migrate to the north because, again, these northern cities, these large industries are seeking individuals to work in their production plants. And so you see Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, New York, all of these places see spikes in African American population. A lot of times the jobs that they're able to secure are better than the jobs that they would have had back home. Obviously, that's why they're moving. They are still barred from employment in a lot of cases, and so Roosevelt creates the FEPC in 1941 to try to break down some of those barriers. And blacks were even allowed to serve in the military. Now they're segregated; they're in their own separate units. But many served quite valiantly. For example, the Tuskegee Airmen. You see the picture down there at the bottom. There's also been a movie released here recently that highlights the efforts of groups like the Tuskegee Airmen. So they also have more than their fair share in terms of helping and contributing to the war effort. Now, other groups as well. The United States does need, obviously, labor, and as migratory patterns of African Americans in the South move north, though what few industries we have in the South and in the West, especially agricultural industries, they also need work, and so we actually, as a country, allow Mexicans to actually come into the United States to help with agricultural work. This is the lines here between legal and illegal are somewhat blurred. These Mexicans were not allowed to become full-fledged citizens. They were simply allowed to work in the United States. The intent was that they would eventually return to Mexico. Obviously, a number of them did not. But they were allowed by America to come in for labor reasons. And so obviously you have issues that are not implicitly worked out before this agreement is arranged, like what about individuals who are born while parents are here in the United States. So there's a lot of issues that this brings about. You have a number that do become naturalized citizens and even serve with distinction in the war. You also have some tension, things like the Zoot Suit riots, where you have younger Mexican Americans and sailors in Los Angeles who, exchange slurs and exchange words. They're involved in riots in Los Angeles in the mid-1940s. You also have Native Americans who find their place in the war effort as they will use their language. You gotta keep in mind that Native American languages such as the Navajo, in the case of the Code Talkers, are very, very obscure. If you are a German, if you're an Italian, if you're Japanese, there are ways for you to learn English, obviously. And so that becomes, in terms of sending out messages, you can't really just use English. You can't really just use, Morse code. These are obviously very popular modes of communication, but you could use something very obscure like Navajo. Navajo is not something that's found in any other part of the country or in any other part of the world. So we do use the Navajo as code talkers. And this is popularized in the Nicolas Cage movie Wind Talkers. I want to say that's about 2005 or 2006 if you're interested in that. So that's going to bring us to the actual war itself, and we're going to pause here, and then we'll come back with a part 3 and probably a part 4 as well. So be on the lookout for that.